Welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. Welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast. I'm your host, John Haskell, and today we are going to talk about learning curves and the power of compounding. We talk a lot about continuing ed on this show. We also talk about money topics like investing and like compound growth. Today, I want to unite those two concepts and make sure that we understand that those two things actually are very much the same thing when we talk about principles. I want to use an example today of two ranches, both of which are equal in terms of assets. They are next to each other. They have the same soil, same infrastructure. They're both 500-cow ranches. One of those ranches has the opportunity to provide blessings to generations of family. The other has the opportunity to provide real problems and challenges. These two ranches are exactly the same in every way you possibly can make them, except for the way they are run. The difference between the two operators of these ranches are the things they know, the relationships they have, and the way they choose to manage. This is where I'm going to pivot a little bit. We're going to talk for now. I've left you with that example. We're going to talk for now about learning curves. Most people in our society talk about learning curves incorrectly. When we talk about a steep learning curve, most people are applying that as something hard to learn. Let's draw a graph where we have a learning curve. On the horizontal axis or the x-axis is time. So we might start at a year, okay? Start at 1900, go to 1925, 1950, 1975, 2000, right? We have this progression of time to the right on the horizontal axis. On the y-axis or the vertical axis, we have the accumulation of knowledge. And what we see is that as we move to the right, as we move forward in time, knowledge often increases, at least hopefully it does. And when we talk about a steep learning curve, what that means is that as we go to the right a little bit, we go up a lot. In fact, the problem we find is not with steep learning curves, but with shallow ones. Most things we deal with in life are actually exponential growth curves, just like the way bacteria grows, the way plants grow, etc., where we have a long flat period. And the problem with that in a learning curve is that long flat period, it doesn't look like much is happening. And then after quite a long time, we have an inflection point where that curve starts to go up, the slope increases, our accumulation of knowledge accelerates. So most people are not frustrated by steep learning curves, they're frustrated by shallow ones. And shallow ones are the most common. Now, I have been watching my kids at school, and it's been a lot of fun because basically for the first 3 years of their school career, which includes like a pre-K program, a kindergarten, and then first grade, the first year they go to school, they spend a lot of time learning letters. There are 26 letters in the English alphabet. The first year of pre-K, they spend a lot of time just learning those letters. They probably learn a bunch of sounds too, but the focus is on letters. After we've learned letters, we learn that letters are the building blocks of words. Well, now we take those 26 letters and we start to combine them. And the cool thing about our alphabet is there really is no limit to the number of new words that we can create. We only have 26 letters. Well, the first year, let's say you learn 26 letters. Your second year of school, which might be kindergarten, you start learning words. Well, maybe you're learning 3-letter words. Well, maybe you learn 50 to 100 of those. Well, by the time you get to, and I don't know what the real numbers are. I just, watching my kids, I'm kind of guessing. By the time they get to first grade, now they're learning, I think, hundreds of words, and they're learning how to build sentences. Now, sentences take this mixing of letters to an even greater level where it gets more and more complex. Nobody could predict how many words there are in a language based on the number of letters, okay? In the same way, I'm going to come back to this a little later, no one could predict how much wealth could be created by a certain set of assets. As I began getting really interested in successful ranching, I was very lucky to encounter a number of people who were willing to teach me. One of the first things I got interested in was grazing management. How can I get my land to be more productive? Well, 5 or 10 years of study of that, meeting people like Jim Garish, meeting Fred Provenza, understanding how grazing management worked. Quickly after that, I realized that what I needed also was to learn about stockmanship. Stockmanship has nothing to do with grazing management, except for the fact that if I have a complex or even a moderately complex grazing plan, if I'm a good stockman, that grazing plan is much easier to implement. Finally, in my personal progression, I had actually learned about sell-by marketing very early on, but I didn't really get interested in it and really dig into it until later, because now what I found is that by making the ground more productive, by making pastures more productive, by making the work easier to implement a good pasture plan, what I really needed to understand is, what should I own? What should I sell? What should I buy? What should I own to get the most value back out of my grazing management and my stockmanship? So what we see is that learning happens in different domains, okay, just like we talk about in grazing, stockmanship, and marketing, and that as we start to combine those different things, we get compounding upon compounding. So each of those domains, each of those learning areas, if you will, has a compound growth curve or a learning curve. And then when we combine them together, those compound growth curves amplify each other, okay? If I'm getting to the real upslope on my stockmanship and I'm getting to the upslope on my grazing management, I'm getting a big upslope on my sell-by marketing application, I am now improving my ranch rapidly in many different ways.
Want to sharpen your business skills without leaving the ranch? Our Ranch Right webinars cover everything from the financial basics to business strategy and tax prep, all taught by our own ranching and finance experts from the team at Ranch Right. Join us online, ask questions, and get practical tools you can put to work tomorrow. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn to receive updates on our next session, and catch up on all of our past webinars by visiting and subscribing to Ranch Right LLC on YouTube.
I'm going to review an example out of compound interest, right? We talk about this with investing, with money management, with reinvesting in our business. If I take a kid who's born, and at that time they're born, I put $10,000 into a money market account, or, invested in like a S&P 500 ETF, some sort of stock vehicle like that. What we see is that there is compound growth. And we're familiar with the fact that if I put $10,000 in, I'm going to, at a 10% return, right? I'm going to make about $1,000 in the first year. I'm going to make a little more than, like $1,100 in the second year, $1,200 in the third year, et cetera. If I carry that all the way out to year 30, I'm going to be making almost $20,000 a year. Okay. In this case, the money that I made from the accumulation of interest made money, and that's the compounding part. What I think we find is that ultimately in our businesses and in our ranchers is stewardship is the thing that unites all these domains, okay? We've talked about stacking these domains so that our learning curves build on each other. We also do that with our money, where our finances build on each other. We do that with our relationships, where we develop larger and larger networks of people that we know and that we can work with. We very much do that with our organizational capital, with the people that work with us, with the channels that we're able to use, let's say to find custom grazers or to know good commission buyers and those sorts of things. Stewardship is what ultimately unites all of our learning and helps us compound it in ways that are truly productive in our business. Over and over again, we see cases where financial literacy appears to be an unfair advantage in our industry. And the reason that is because if you are financially literate, you can see how your daily actions translate into your bank account. You can see the connection between what you're doing on the ground and what is happening in your wallet. You can see the connection between what you're doing in your family, how those things compound. The reason we do all of these educational projects is because we feel that that unfair advantage should be available to anybody. We do 2 webinars a month. We have this podcast. I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and definitely attend our live webinars. There's one on the first Thursday of the month and one on the third Thursday of the month. The first Thursday of the month, we talk about building a better business. Recently, we've been talking a lot about HR issues there. The third Thursday of the month is all about financial basics. Those are the types of things that propel the 2 ranches I began with at the beginning to very different places. I want to use another example before I get back to that ranch. I want to use another example of a good friend of mine and how money is not always a solution to the problem, and money is not always a good thing. Money really is neutral. got a good friend from my very young days who is a drug addict. I have another friend who is a wonderful money manager. If I give each of those two people, I'll use Wally as the money manager example. If I give each of those two $1 million, it will probably kill my drug addict friend. I don't say that to pick on him, but when that type of situation arises, he always makes a bad choice. And I feel terrible for him for that. I wish it wasn't so, but there's nothing I can do about that. If I give Wally Olson $1 million, Wally Olson's going to turn it into more than $1 million. Wally Olson's going to give a portion of it away. Wally Olson's going to use it to buy pigs that he uses to feed people that are having trouble in Northeast Oklahoma. Wally Olson is going to use it to generate partnerships and generate value with other people. Wally Olson is going to take the exact same $1 million that killed my friend, and he is going to use it to create good. He's going to use it to create value. Wally Olson sees and understands the value of money, and he has knowledge and wisdom and some degree of personal, self-control, discipline, whatever, set of personal habits that allow him to act effectively on that. I hope that you will take the things that we teach and apply them for good in your life. I hope that you will continue compounding the things that you learn, building one upon the other, so that you really can stand on the shoulders of giants. The reason I do this podcast is because there are people like Bud Williams and Wally Olson and Walter Lynn and many, many more who have been incredibly nice to me, who have taught me unbelievable things that, compared to the cost, I have seen ROIs on that education that I received that is just absolutely unbelievable. I paid Bud Williams, I think, $400 to go to the first sell-by marketing class I went to. And to say that returns millions of dollars per year to my wife and I is not an exaggeration. It has been a wonderful experience, and I hope that we can pass that same knowledge on to you, because it's not the assets that matter, it's the knowledge. The last thing I want to cover today is how we talk about passing when it comes to succession. We think about succession all wrong. We are often asset focused when we do succession. Let's get back to this 500 cow ranch. The difference between those two operations and the reason why one creates wealth and one creates problems is because of the knowledge, because of the stewardship that is applied to both of those ranches. When we pass to the next generation, we often forget that that is the big difference maker, and we focus on passing and protecting the assets. What we really should be doing is passing and protecting the knowledge. The problem with passing knowledge is that it is hard. I have to teach my kids stuff all the time because they're young. They're trying to learn how to do the dishes. They're trying to learn how to clean the garage. They're trying to learn how to clean their room, make their bed, get dressed, all those things. It would be easier for me to hand them $100 than it is to give them $100 worth of education. It is incredibly difficult and time-consuming and frankly frustrating to teach our children. It's a wonderful process too, don't get me wrong, but it is time-consuming and it is not as easy. And in the affluent situation that most of us live in today, what we find is that we often try to take a shortcut. And in that shortcut, we create misery for future generations. I've seen it in my own family. I see it in generations of history. Many of us can find examples where at different times our families were very wealthy and at different times they were impoverished. And most of the time, that's not because the impoverished people didn't necessarily start off impoverished. They usually started off with something that their parents or grandparents or someone had given to them and then squandered it. And that is one of the saddest things I think that we can possibly do. Over and over again, we see cases where that prove that the American dream is real, that it is absolutely possible to live and get ahead in the United States of America. We have a wonderful system that is far from perfect, but it still gives us great advantage over really any people that have lived in human history and most people that live in the rest of the world. We have so many advantages that we often forget how severe the consequences are of not focusing on the right things. If in our generational succession we are focused on assets, we are probably missing the point. Thank you for listening today. Very glad to have you. I hope this podcast is helpful to you, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for tuning into the Ranchnomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.